The forests of central Kenya once breathed with a quiet, ancient strength. For countless generations, tall trees watched over streams and footpaths worn smooth by the Kikuyu people. For them, this land was not just property, it was ancestry, identity, a living history. Every ridge and valley held a story, every tree a silent witness to a way of life deeply connected to the earth. But by the middle of the 20th century, that connection was being severed. The whispers of the forest were being drowned out by the clang of colonial rule. Under British control, the most fertile lands, the very heart of the Kikuyu homeland, were systematically taken and handed over to white settlers. Families who had farmed this soil for centuries found themselves pushed into crowded, infertile reserves. Stripped of their livelihood, they were forced to work for wages on the same land that had once belonged to their fathers. To add insult to injury, new taxes were imposed, and their freedom of movement was heavily restricted. Voices that dared to complain were silenced. The pressure built, and slowly the forest, which had once been a place of peace, began to listen to a growing anger. Among the dispossessed, especially the young men and women, a secret oath began to spread. It was an oath of unity, an oath of defiance, an oath of resistance. They called themselves the Mau Mau. It was a name whispered with fear by the colonial authorities, but spoken with desperate hope by those who felt they had nothing left to lose. The time for asking, they decided, was over. Freedom, they believed, now had to be taken. When the uprising finally ignited in 1952, it was not a conventional war. There were no grand armies clashing on open fields. Instead, the Mau Mau fighters melted into the dense forests of the Aberdare Ranges in Mount Kenya. They became ghosts moving silently through the trees, surviving on what the land provided, striking with speed and precision before vanishing back into the shadows. They were farmers by day and fighters by night. Some carried old, unreliable rifles. Others carried nothing but their courage and a profound belief in their cause. They were fighting for their land, their dignity, their future. The British Empire's response was swift and overwhelming. A state of emergency was declared across Kenya. Thousands of soldiers and police were deployed, not just to fight the guerrillas in the forest, but to control the entire Kikuyu population. A strategy of collective punishment was put into action. Villages were surrounded by barbed wire, their residents subjected to constant surveillance and searches. Entire communities were forcibly relocated into guarded settlements, which the British called protected villages, but which functioned more like concentration camps. Anyone even suspected of supporting the Mau Mau, often on the flimsiest of evidence, was detained. A vast network of detention camps spread across the colony. Men were torn from their families, women were interrogated, and children grew up behind fences, their playgrounds patrolled by armed guards. Inside these camps, forced labor, brutal punishment, and systematic humiliation were used as tools of control. The colonial government's goal was not just to defeat the rebellion militarily, but to break its very spirit, to crush the will of a people to be free. Yet, despite the overwhelming force arrayed against them, the forests did not empty. The fighters held on. They endured hunger, fear, and devastating loss. They were sustained by the belief that they were not just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for the generations to come, for their children and their children's children, who they hoped would one day walk freely on their own land. Imagine a young man named Kamo, a former farm laborer whose family's ancestral land was now part of a sprawling white settler estate during the day, hiding in the cool, damp undergrowth. He would remember the songs of planting season, the taste of food from his mother's fire. The stories his father told. By night, as he stood guard, listening to the forest breathe around him, he would wonder if freedom would ever truly come. He knew the cost was immense, that death was a constant companion. But the thought of surrender, of accepting a life of subservience, felt even worse. As the years of brutal conflict dragged on, the truth of what was happening in Kenya could no longer be contained. Reports of widespread abuses, torture in the camps, and the immense suffering of the civilian population began to leak out. International pressure started to mount on Britain. The moral and financial cost of the war was becoming unsustainable. the British government began. To realize that an empire built on fear and maintained by force could not last forever. In 1960, the state of emergency was finally lifted. The iron grip began to loosen. Just 3 years later, in 1963, Kenya achieved its independence. A new flag was raised, a new nation was born. But freedom had come at a terrible price. Many of the Mau Mau fighters who had sacrificed everything did not live to see it. They were buried in unmarked graves in the very forest that had sheltered them. Others returned home to their families, but they carried deep scars, both physical and psychological, that no one else could see for many years after independence. The story of the Mau Mau was pushed to the side. It was an uncomfortable history. A painful memory for a new nation trying to forge a united identity. The fighters were often officially ignored, their contributions downplayed or dismissed. But memory, like a powerful river, has a way of rising to the surface. Today, those forests in central Kenya still stand. A new generation of Kenyans is learning the history that was once only whispered in secret. The Mau Mau are no longer remembered as terrorists, as the colonial propaganda had labeled them, but as freedom fighters, as a crucial part of the long, painful struggle that led to Kenya's independence. Their story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of injustice. And the land itself, scarred but alive, still holds their footsteps because some stories refuse to stay buried and some forests never. Never forget, thank you for watching. If you found this story important, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more hidden histories from around the world.